Hi, everyone. So I have my guest here with me today, Ahmed, and I'm really excited to have him here. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a background into how Ahmed and I came to know each other. So one day, one evening, I was mindlessly scrolling through TikTok and I saw a live that was going on, and Ahmed was the one hosting the live. And I requested to join that live, and he invited me in, and we had a very productive conversation about some of the things that interest him in politics and so on. And so ever since that time, I've been following his journey on social media, and he has also been following me likewise. And so we've kind of grown a little bit of a relationship. And one of the most important things that I want to achieve with this podcast is the fact that the name of the podcast is Restitch America. And in order to do so, we need to start having conversations, even with people who we think disagree with us. And what I want this to be is a model of a civilized conversation between two people who may disagree on certain things. Now, another thing I've noticed over time is that a lot of times we come into conversations thinking that we disagree on everything. I hear people say things like, "Oh, I don't think I agree on anything with this person." I don't think that is ever true, because in any kind of situation, you would find a lot of common ground. I think what unites us is much greater than the things that divide us. And so today we're going to focus on a couple of those things that become points of division in our society today. And hopefully we can get a little bit of an understanding of where the other side is coming from in their arguments and so on. So that's what I'm hoping we will be able to do today. And Ahmed, I'm really excited that you decided to join me today. So thank you. We're going to start with, a little bit of ice breaking to get to know you a little bit. So if you don't mind, first question, share a funny story your family tells about you that you would like other people to know. Do you have a funny story? If I spoke to your mom and said, "Hey, share something funny about Ahmed," what will she say?
Oh man. Uh, so when I was a kid, like we obviously my parents are both immigrants and we grew up with like not a lot of things to do to occupy our time. Like we didn't have gaming systems, cables, stuff like that. So our imagination was what kept us busy. And when I was a kid, I used to like take my mattress and like put it vertically and like ride it like a horse. And I would like obviously the bed was not made for that or near like the bed frame either. And it would like crack all the wood. And my mom would just be furious that we're doing that. But I mean I was bored and I was a kid and eventually my siblings would also start doing that. And my parents would always say that I'm the reason why all of our furniture was torn to hell. So
That is cool. So where did you grow up? Where were you born in the US?
actually, I was born in Sudan. That's why I used to like say I'm 1.5 generation because I was, and that's like a new term that's coming along. It's going to meaning that then between one and two, obviously 1.5 being first generation meaning you're born somewhere else, coming to America, and second generation meaning you're a product of parents that came here. But they use the term 1.5 to say like a a child who was born elsewhere and then comes to America very young. So they have their formative years in the United States. So we came to New York when I was still an infant. So
Okay.
I have very little memory, really no memory of there. So
Okay. That's good to know. So you are basically American. So are you an American citizen now?
yeah, I am. I got my
Okay.
citizenship in the military.
Awesome. Awesome. So you're a military vet as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I was a
Okay. Where
Marine
did you
for 7
serve?
years.
Well, what branch of the armed forces?
I was a Navy corpsman, kind of
Okay.
like a medic.
That's cool. That's cool. So that dives right into your background right now as a registered nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you for your service. And okay, so I know a little bit. I've learned more about you in this couple of minutes than I did before. So that's awesome. All right. So another question that I have for you is, tell me about some influential people in your life that have impacted kind of your worldview and that have impacted your life.
Cool. So I'll give you two.
Okay.
First ones, I guess, couple them together. My parents, um, they they kind of like led the framework for how I want to structure my life. Mark Cuban, he coins this term. Yeah, you know, right? The immigrant mentality, right?
Yeah.
That that that's part of who I am. Right? They both work. They obviously had no degrees coming in. My dad barely graduated high school. My mom didn't. Over there, obviously. And when they came to America, they came on an asylum. Right? They had nothing. So they both working double jobs. When very little, would both parents be at home. But when at the time, I really was kind of frustrating, right? Because people around me were, you know, they could have like birthdays and celebrations, stuff like that. And we didn't. But when I became an adult and, you know, obviously serving the military and then I came out, I reflected back on that and made me much more appreciative. But then also like, why did they have to work so hard, you know, to do something that other people that maybe didn't in similar circumstances, you know? So that work ethic was kind of ingrained in me. And then the other person, it's kind of like historical figure. Actually, his birthday was like a couple of days ago, but it's actually Muhammad Ali. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest Americans ever. He was a man who was an extremely proficient. Obviously, people call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time in boxing. So he was a perfectionist of his craft, the greatest of his craft, but he also didn't let that overshadow like his message, his beliefs. We all know that, you know, he was abject to the war in Vietnam. He was abject to the treatment of African Americans in this country by the system. And he did not, even though he knew that sticking to his principles would jeopardize him. Obviously, he went in jail. He lost his boxing license. He still stuck to that. He said, I don't believe this is right. And no matter what you guys try to do to me, you can't like harm like my person by me sticking to this. And he stuck to it. And obviously his message is eternal. So
All right, that's really good to hear. And so in this few minutes, what I'm seeing here is we do have things in common, right? I look to my parents and the opportunities they gave me, and in preparing me to come to America. I am a second generation American. I came here when I was 19, and so I was already getting into adulthood when I came here. And just like you said, you know, we didn't have much. I was a poor college student and I had to work through the system and get educated, and kind of work my way to where I am today. And I didn't do that all on my own. I did that with the help of a lot of people along the way as well. So I'm glad to hear that we almost kind of have similar backgrounds in the sense that we come from immigrants. I am an immigrant. You are an immigrant as well. And we are both, you know, from Africa. And so my next question to you would be, when you think about America, what is your sense of what America stands for and what you believe America is lacking today?
Sure. So I think it's America, you look at it from like the outside looking in, you know, it's the land of opportunity. It's a land where, you know, anybody can come here with, you know, the right means, right? It's not just it's not easy for people to get to America in the first place. But when you get here, you have access um, to the tools to succeed, right? People, when they think about the American dream, but a lot, especially as I've got older, even my I don't have much family. Actually, most of my family is still over there. Actually, some of my aunties and uncles are here in the States, but I still have a lot of family over there. But I remember as a kid, a lot of them would be like, "Oh, like you're in America, like, you know, how cool is it over there?" And like they always want me to, like, you know, send them games and like all this cool stuff. But my brother, or my younger brother, and my sister were actually just there for a wedding for one of our cousins, and we were FaceTiming them, and some of the kids over there, they that like excitement and like enthusiasm with America is kind of like dulled a little bit, because I think they are starting to like realize that, you know, maybe like it's not all that people thought to be, right? Because there's a lot that America is lacking, in my opinion. We have these like, you know, the American dream, everyone can succeed, whatever, but it's very difficult to do that when there are so many hurdles in your way, right? America, when you look at abject poverty with first world countries, we're not doing too great. There are many, many countries ahead of us. First world countries, obviously, we're doing much better than a lot of other countries with regard to abject poverty. But we live in this like capitalistic society where opportunity is supposed to be out there, but so many people are out of the job, not for lack of trying. Poverty is really endemic. Less than 1% of the population, or its majority, over 99% of the wealth, and those inequalities are. It's when you actually get into America and then you're like at the bottom worker level, trying to work your way up to I would just say middle class, upper middle class. It's it's a little difficult when you're looking at all these the true reality of being working class in America, in my opinion.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. So basically, just to summarize what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is there's a veneer of America that is presented to the rest of the world, where people look at America from the outside looking in as this place of opportunity, a place where people's dreams can come true, where you can go from the bottom of the working class all the way down or all the way up to upper class and so on. And in some cases, people become wealthy and successful. However, when you come into the actual inside of America, what you're suggesting is that it's a little more difficult than it appears to people outside. And so there is poverty and there is lack of opportunity in certain places. There is a lot of difficulty in terms of access to different basic things that may prevent a person from achieving the kind of rosy idea of the American dream. Am I capturing that right?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so what I would like to ask then is, I want to understand the perspective of someone who is on the left on how to solve these problems. So before we even do that, one of the things that I notice is in society, it's very easy for people to point out what the problems are. And this is something coming from Ghana myself. We are professional like problem seers rather than problem solvers. That's how I felt anyway. Some other people might have a different idea, but that's how I saw it. We always gathered around the table to talk about the problems that we saw in the society, right? And we always were very articulate in defining these problems. The really difficult part is proposing solutions that actually work. And so if someone asks me, what are we all fighting for in this world? Yesterday, I was thinking about it and I thought I would put it in a single question. And so I'm going to read that question to you, and then we're going to talk about some of your ideas with that. So I said, the goal basically in any country or in any society is, how can we create a society that acknowledges and defends our rights, creates economic opportunity, protects the environment, and cares for the vulnerable by providing a safe and dignified existence for all? And I think that question really encompasses every political ideology, every political tactic, every policy that is proposed. I think that is where the ultimate goal lies. And the real differences in America lies between how we achieve that particular solution. And so what I want to hear from you is why, one, you believe the policies of the left are more suited to creating a society that acknowledges and defends our unalienable rights, creates economic opportunity, protects the environment, and cares for the vulnerable by providing a safe and dignified existence. So if you don't mind, tell me what policies you think help and why you think they help.
Sure. So going back, let's start. I'll start from the bottom up, right? So protecting our environment and protecting the vulnerable, those two things are directly intertwined, because we know that, excuse me, the people that are being affected by climate change are people that are living in poverty, right? Those are the people that whenever these city planners and these businessmen are making their plans to build like runoff drains and just sewers and landfills. They're not building it in the suburbs where the rich people live. They're building it near the city where people less affluent are living. And those are the things that accelerate climate change. So those things are too intertwined. And I think that those two things, really all the things that you mentioned, are directly intertwined in our culture and our capitalistic society in America. Because by nature and by definition, capitalism incentivizes only one thing, and that's and that's profit, only profit. There's no room for ethics in capitalism in America, really anywhere, because those two things most of the time are like they conflict each other. So how can I, if I'm like the CFO of Exxon, why would I be worried about, building this oil pipeline near these homes when instead of building it somewhere out a little bit further out from the city, when I can save like $2 million by doing this? Obviously, I'm going to do that, the latter, which saves money, because my interest is giving the best value to my shareholders, which puts the most money in my pockets. So by doing that, the one that saves the amount of money, the most amount of money, I'm putting the most amount of people in danger. But that means nothing to me, because profit is what drives me. And we see this historically, and especially in Texas where I live, we see oil spills all the time. What happens? Oh, they give them a small fine. The city, really, a lot of times they send the city out to go clean it up or assist with their cleanup. So our taxes are fixing a mess up from capitalists, and then they go building another one and nobody cares. So I think a solution to this should be driving away from this individualistic, capitalistic society and more towards a collectivist, socialist society. And when we do things like this, we can help empower everyone, because it's like, I think a lot of what drives the idea of socialism is the collectivist nature of it. So especially African communities, a lot of them are collectivists. This is why I truly believe this is what people think about the immigrant mentality. It's rooted in collectivism. I believe that you mentioned it earlier, how you didn't succeed on your own. You had people that can help you, your family, and I don't know who else you mentioned, but that's all part of the collectivist nature. That's why we thrive, because it's not just us, right? In capitalist society is, hey, I have to succeed. I have to work better than the person next to me, because if I don't, I'm not going to get promoted. He's going to get promoted. And that takes food off my table, my family's table. So screw him. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's bad. Forget him. I have to work harder, because it's a race, it's competition. I have to be the best. And that's in the society that I want when we were talking about protecting the vulnerable. And I mentioned earlier about the veterans that, we see homelessness is endemic in the veteran population in the United States, which is really sad, because these people, while we're serving, we feel like heroes, right? Americans, thank you for your service. You see at football games, baseball games, jets flying around, the national anthem. You feel, at least while you're in, you feel a lot of pride, nationalism by serving. But then as soon as you take that uniform off, you sign that DV-214, good luck, Chuck. And you can no longer, provide money being like, obviously you're not paying for the military, but money meaning like you're serving and you can add a product to the military industrial complex. And I think we go to like more like a socialist, collectivist society, those interests will like start to dissolve, because we'll focus more on the group, less on the individuals at the top. Everybody who's involved in that project, everybody who works at Mobil to build these pipelines will have a say in what goes on. So if I'm in like a socialist society and I'm working at Mobil for Mobil, the CEO is not the one making the decision on where to put these pipelines on. The workers are collectively. So why would they say, oh, we're going to put these oil pipelines that are going to burst and fill our cities with oil near where people live? We're going to put it somewhere else where the damage is not, directly harmful to us. And I think that those measures will be really beneficial for that purpose.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. And I want to challenge a couple of things that you said.
Mhm.
And so, just in really quick summary, what you're saying is you believe having a more socialist economy or a
Mhm.
collectivist economy that is more focused on giving everybody a voice and allowing everybody a piece of the decision-making power in the things that affect their lives. You feel that that would be a better system than an individualistic system that, allows people to kind of look for their own self-interests and not necessarily consider the interests of other people, right? Okay.
Mhm.
So now my philosophy, and I don't know if you know this from my content, but my philosophy primarily is in the idea that one, in order to solve any problem, you have to first be able to diagnose the problem. And then once you diagnose the problem, you have to identify a solution to the problem that actually achieves the outcomes that you're looking for, right? It is very easy to sell solutions that may sound good, but in reality don't work. And what I've found over my research and over my lifetime is the fact that a lot of times policies that don't work usually don't work because they go against the nature of human beings. Okay. So if you want to craft policies that would work, it is inherent upon you, or it's incumbent upon you to find policies that don't go against human nature because you will have a natural resistance to those policies. So, for instance, if you and I are stranded on a deserted island, right, and we decide, okay, we're here on this deserted island, and I have I'm a doctor, so or you are a nurse, so you have nursing skills, but you don't have any farming skills, right? And I am a farmer, and so I have farming skills. Okay, we both have something that each other needs. Okay, so how do we come to an agreement that allows us to create an existence that benefits both of us? Right? In order to do so, we have to come to some agreement on an exchange, right? You have to offer your services to me. I have to offer my services to you, and we can mutually benefit from that transaction. Okay. Now, I have to focus on being the best farmer that I can be, and you have to focus on being the best nurse that you can be, right? So now, in that kind of system, am I obligated to provide you food? Would you say?
Mhm.
And vice versa, you are not obligated to provide me nursing services for my wounds, right? And so the only way we both survive is to come up with something, some kind of mutual agreement, right? And so far we're good. We're on the same page with that. Okay. So now, so then the question comes to, what do you as a human being have a right to, right? So when we talk about a collectivist society, there's a suggestion that there is something like a base set of needs that people have a right to. And that society has to provide those base set of needs. So on this deserted island, what do you have a right to? So for instance, if I say, um, we're both on this island and I say, hey, I have a right to healthcare, for instance. Is that real or is that an imagined thing? Do I have a right to your services? Now, if you say, I have a right to food in this deserted island, right? Is it my obligation to then provide you with food because you have a right to it? Or is our rights are these actually commodities that we share and we transact with each other to be able to give each of us the ability to survive, right? And so one of the things you said about capitalism was that inherently capitalism has no ethics tied to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, what I think a lot of times when people talk about capitalism, they look at America today, they look at the problems that you've mentioned, and many of the things you talked about are actual real problems. So I'm not denying any of that. They look at those problems and then they say, capitalism, that's the problem. And I call it the framing of capitalism. It's like capitalism gets framed for things that actually have nothing to do with capitalism. Okay. Capitalism is me recognizing that I need something that I can't produce myself and I need to work with you. If I choose to exploit you in that transaction, you will refuse voluntarily to provide your services to me as well, right? You will go to somebody else. My business will die down, right? There's nothing inherent in the trading that says I have to treat you poorly, okay? There's nothing inherent in that. And in any system, any market system, if I choose to treat you poorly, the market system will take care of me in the sense that you will tell other people that this man treated me poorly. Other people will choose to take their services elsewhere, right? And so there's nothing inherent in capitalism that says I have to treat you in an exploitative manner, because at the end of the day, if I'm a big oil company and I decide to pollute the area that I'm trying to build in, I decide to pollute and it affects the people downstream because I want to save $2 million, right? In the end, that is not capitalism, because who gave the permits, right? Probably some government, right? Who are the people staffing the government? Who are the people giving them a pass, right? All those things you're talking about have nothing to do with capitalism, have everything to do with a governmental system, right? That is separate from capitalism. Capitalism is just the mechanism of a free market and a system of freedom that allows people to trade voluntarily with each other. Now, the regulations that allow for abuses have nothing to do with capitalism in its core, okay? So I guess, what do you think about that? And what do you think about that sentiment as you hear it?
Yeah, you made a lot of interesting points. I think the analogy to, or a metaphor of a desert island, and I believe the point you're trying to make is that nobody is entitled to somebody else's labor. Am I correct in saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, at its root, yes, like nobody, and this desert island, yes, there's only two people there, and one person has this wage or this labor skills, and the person has another. I can't force somebody else to work for me. This is obviously slavery, indentured servitude. This is not compatible with society ever. But what the difference, I think, is that what allows socialism to really work is really any system really is that social contract that exists, which I believe exists in any society, and definitely in America, especially at the bottom. People, by virtue of living in society, and especially if you're thinking about a socialist society, like we can use Nicaragua before the CIA decided to coup them. But we can think about societies like that where everything is nationalized. People don't have to. The companies like the company that owned all this property there, that was using that to extract resources and from this country and take it away from the people that deserved it, and then use it to generate profit for one individual or the company. They're doing this with selfish means. But when you nationalize that and then give the people the ability to own that, they feel pride and ownership. And even if you say, oh, they might not feel prideful, they might, I don't know, whatever. It's the idea that by you being a part of this, like say the people that own, we used the mobile analogy earlier, those people, they have a vested interest of being part of that system. Because if you don't say you, I don't know, whatever, you say, hey, I don't want to, you're the guy that makes the couplings, and you say, I don't want to do this anymore. You will not be, you'll be shunned by that society. And that is when your needs are met, which in this socialist society they are. You don't have to worry about, oh, I have to work, I have to make 40 hours this week putting on these couplings, because if I don't, then my kids will starve, or my house will be foreclosed. Those are gone. You don't have to worry about that. So all of your focus can be on all of those stresses are gone. So now you are now responsible for your community, and the fear of losing that, or feeling like you're no longer part of this cog, is motivation enough to where you're not having to where that, I don't think that problem will really be much of an issue, because you're not worried about all those other things that existed before in capitalist society, rent, food, whatever. Those things are met. So now you can you can work because you want to work.
I get that. I get that idea. And like I said, it sounds very good. It sounds interesting, right? A society where your needs are met, so you don't have to stress about paying your bills. Your children are going to be fed. And by so doing, you have the freedom and capability to worry about other things like, helping your community and so on. So I like that. But once again, that assumes that everybody is aligned internally the same way, right? That assumes, it's a huge assumption. And that is why from the beginning I said, in order for policies and ideologies to work, they have to be in line with human nature. Okay, so what the world is filled with what I call, not what I call, but the theory of entropy. Are you familiar with entropy?
Yeah, energy in, energy out.
Exactly. Exactly. Chaos is inevitable in every system, and it takes a lot of energy to create order, right? And so everything kind of devolves into chaos, and we have to make a concerted effort to create order. And so with that kind of idea, the suggestion that I could bring a group of people together, right? And we could all be aligned in our goals. We could all be aligned in what we want to do. And we could create this society where everybody is so aligned that the person who is standing across from you has no instinct, no feeling, no reason to steal from you, right? Because we're so aligned in our goals and but such a world does not exist, right? Such a world does not exist. And so if you're creating a solution that does not fit a world that currently exists, then we live in pipe dreams that can never be brought to fruition. And so when I think of a socialism, I think of a lot of ideas that suggest that the human being has been transformed into this altruistic, non-selfish, person who walks into the world and says, what can I do for humanity, and not what I do for myself, right? Now, that is a version of humanity that does not exist. Now, I'm not saying there are not individuals who may feel that way and act that way. I believe there are, and throughout history, there have been examples of people who have done that, who have been willing to be completely selfless. As a Christian, I see Jesus Christ as such a person, right? A person who was willing to be completely selfless to his own detriment, right? But that's not the world we live in, right? And so if you come in and you say, okay, let's create this world, this socialistic collectivist world where everybody's aligned and everybody's going and working with all their might. They're not slacking off. They're all working with all the energy and fortitude they can, using their talents to serve the collective, right? Now, that would be a very cool and interesting world, except that world doesn't exist. So if you take socialism and you say, now, I want to do that, I want to create that world, then what you have to do is to take away autonomy from people. You have to take away their freedom. You have to take away their ability to voluntarily choose what they want to do with their life, whether it is to smoke dope all day or to walk the streets and not want to have any responsibility. You have to take away those freedoms and say, no, we have to work for the collective. And so you have to be in this spot doing this thing. And as soon as you get into that situation, the question is, who is enforcing that power? And why is that person given the authority to enforce that power on somebody else? And so in the end, you end up with people who are oppressed because they're not allowed to do what they want with their own lives, because somebody else has determined that what they're doing is not productive for the collective, and therefore they have to do something that is more productive. So you have to necessarily take away people's freedom in order to create that kind of world. And so if you look at socialistic regimes of the past, and I personally grew up in a country that kind of had those same tendencies of, hey, the rich and capitalism are the problem, and we need to eliminate that. We need to nationalize things. When I was growing up, or before I was growing up, before this idea kind of seeped into our country, there were lots of factories that were producing different things that the government then took over and summarily ruined. Textile industry, sugar creating industry, all sorts of things were ruined because the government took over and they wanted this top-down approach to things. But once again, it got ruined. And the person who took over had to take over by force. So I grew up for the first 18, 16 years of my life. I only knew one president. I never saw a change in presidents. They had to have that power in order to enforce those things. Okay, so when we think about a political system, I look at it from the perspective of, it's not just what happens on paper or what we think will happen on paper. We first have to figure out, does this jive with human nature? And if it doesn't jive with human nature, then it's going to take force to implement it. And when you start using force, people will revolt against it. And when people revolt, then you have to stop that revolt. And the only way you stop that revolt is either to re-educate them so they change their minds and join the collective, or to eliminate them. That is a necessary, I would posit, a necessary part of socialism. And that's where it always ends, is you have to force people to do something they don't want to do, or you have to eliminate them from the system. Now, if you, Ahmed, decided to create a company where all your employees, your line level employees, have the ability to make the same decisions as the CEO, you can do that in a capitalist society. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that. I think there was a story in Washington some years back where the CEO decided that he was going to take the same pay as everybody else. He was able to do that without any problem. There's no government system, there was no political system, there was no economic system that said you can't do that. Right? There was nothing forcing him. He could do that. Now, most of our families are kind of socialistic in the sense that our children, we all work for the same good. All the money that is made is brought into a pool, and we all share the expenses and so on. And nobody says, hey, I own this portion of the house and you own that portion. And so you can use this part and you need to pay me. No, we all put it all together in a pool. And so in that kind of scenario, in very, very controlled, small, specific scenarios, you can create that kind of collectivist system. What America is saying is that we recognize that outside of that very small system, anything beyond, anything that gets to be bigger than a small company or a small family, it begins to require some kind of oppression, because there will be people in the system who will not comply with what you think is the collective good. And once you have people who don't comply, you have to eliminate those people, because not complying is contagious. As soon as one person stops complying, other people will stop complying. And that is why in countries that have implemented this idea, you necessarily have to put dissidents in jail. You have to eliminate them from the system. how would you counter that?
Yeah, well, I think that there is a lot of when people look at like these socialistic countries, especially in South America, because that is what I'm the most familiar with. Because I know there are some that efforts that tried in Africa. I'm not too familiar with those, but when a lot of people look at them and say, "Oh, like for instance, let's say I used Nicaragua earlier," they say, "Oh, look at Nicaragua. What happened when Taz took over? He became a dictator, and which is true. So many people perished under his rule. But what happened immediately prior to that? The president of Nicaragua nationalized property that was owned by a capitalist American country, the fruit company. They owned the majority of property in Nicaragua, and the president said, "No, this isn't right. Our people are not benefiting from this because, first of all, this is an American who owns this company, and he is benefiting himself and his family is benefiting the most, even though our people at the bottom are doing, he's doing 0% of the work, but the people doing 100% of the work are getting nothing. They're starving. So I'm not going to allow this to happen. All this property that is in my country belongs to the people. And he took it, and now the company didn't own that anymore. So what did they do? They went to Eisenhower and said, hey, look what's happening here. That we have this communist, even though he wasn't communist, by definition wasn't communist. We have these communists down here, and they're messing with my benefits, messing with my profits. And like you mentioned earlier, I wanted to touch base on this, but we kind of went past it. How you said that all these issues that arise are not necessarily due to capitalism. But I counter that and say that they are directly due to capitalism because they are, when I think of capitalism, I think of pursuit of profit, which is the definition of capitalism. You cannot be a capitalist if you're not profit driven, because if you are not profit driven, you will be in the negative, and you cannot be a capitalist if you're losing money. That's an answer to the whole definition of it. And I'll stop there because I want to continue, but I want to make sure that I got what you're at first.
Yeah. So, and that's where I will once again push back a little bit. So the idea of profit is not necessarily tied to capitalism. And the reason I say that is this, profit, right, is something that is, I would say, predates capitalism. And it's embedded in nature itself. And so, for instance, when you plant something, right, what do you expect? You care for it, you put water on it, you fertilize it, and what is your expectation? To get profit. What is the profit? You're putting in a seed and you're expecting to get what? 100 seeds, and not just new seeds, but to get 100 fruit, 1,000 fruit. That is embedded in nature itself. That is not something that capitalism came up and said, hey, let's go pursue profit. It is something that is human in its existence and derives from the very nature of this world, is that what is good is usually something that is profitable, something that creates more than its initial value, right? So a person putting a seed in the ground expecting to get 10 seeds or 100 fruit is not greedy because they want 100 fruit. That is the expectation of the world in which we live, that I put something down, I invest my time and energy, and I get something for it. So it's not, someone woke up in, 1600 and said, hey, let's go do this. Let's go pursue profit. It's just something that derives from human nature and the nature of the world, okay? So if I put a seed in the ground and that seed produces exactly one fruit and I get exactly one seed back, as a human being, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'll say that seed is not profitable. I need to throw it away and grow something different, right? And so, and that would have happened with Neanderthals. It would have happened with, people long before capitalism was derived as any kind of economic system, right? So profit is not capitalism. Capitalism is saying, I need to take my talents and my energy and my desires. I need to create something of value to somebody else. And then I have to voluntarily bring that talent to the market. And then once I bring it to the market will determine the price for what I am selling. And then by so doing, somebody else will come give me the money that they want, give me the money that they have in exchange for the service that I give them. And they do it voluntarily. So when you talk about Nicaragua, or you talk about these isolated cases of interference or companies doing bad things in foreign countries and so on and so forth, that is not capitalism. Because if the company came into that country without paying bribes to politicians who probably, then gave them special deals and so on and so forth, all those things are not capitalism. They're not part of capitalism, right? And so once again, I talk about framing capitalism. It's the idea of seeing all the things that are wrong with human transactions where people are cheating each other. And then we say, oh, because predominantly we live in a capitalist society, then capitalism is to blame. But the profit motive is not something that capitalism invented. It is in nature. The fact that we have reproduction, what is reproduction? The fact that one person can create multiple things so that that seed survives the next generation. That is profit, right? Two people come together and they create something of greater value. And that is just embedded in nature. So it is not a tenet of capitalism to seek profit. Capitalism just says, I bring something to the market, and once again, the caveat is voluntarily. If anybody comes in and tries to do this by force or uses nefarious means like, bullying competitors out of the market and using regulations to kind of kill competition and do those things, all those things are anti-capitalist. They're not embedded in capitalism. That's an adulteration of capitalism. And usually governments are the ones that institute all those tools that today get blamed on capitalism.
Yeah, and I think just like earlier you used like an idealistic view of socialism. I think you're kind of like doing the same thing for capitalism, because you can't separate the two and say, oh, this is not true capitalism, because it is. Like I used the example of Neanderthals earlier, but Neanderthals were actually the first example of socialism. You use the example of a tree, they planted a tree to grow more fruits. But in the Neanderthal communities, the difference being like, let's say in a capital, if the Neanderthals were capitalistic, one of the member would plant this fruit to grow more fruit trees, and then build a fence around it and say, hey, if you want fruit, give me meat, give me. That's not how Neanderthals lived. One person in the community found, let's say they went scavenging, or because they have different skills, right? And we mentioned the exchange of labor. One person was a hunter-gatherer. They went and found this peach tree. They found that you could plant this peach tree and grow more. So they brought that back to the community and they said, hey, look, I found this ability. And then they do it and made peach trees, and then to feed their community. And if they were capitalistic, that hunter and gatherer would have found this peach tree and say, you know what? I could probably get a bunch of lamb for this. So he would have built it and then planted the tree. And once it produces fruit, would say, hey guys, if you want some fruit, you need to give me something.
Exactly.
That's not how they lived.
And I agree with that. I agree with that perfectly, except for the fact that I gave you my caveat that in very small societies, you can create this system, right? You can create this system where we are mutually tied to each other in some way other than just the fact that we're humans, right? We have some familiar relationship with each other. And so, yes, in my family, if I go out and I find meat or fruit or whatever, I bring it back to the family and we all enjoy together and thrive as a family, right? That's natural. And that's perfectly fine. I don't see any problem with it. What I am talking about is taking that and extrapolating that over thousands of people, millions of people, right? That's where the problem begins. So, and the way I can explain it is this. I said, for instance, when you're cooking a recipe, right? When you're cooking a recipe, You can follow all the instructions and say, okay, this recipe serves 10 people. Okay. Now, the assumption would be that if I need to serve 1,000 people, all I have to do is just multiply all my ingredients by 1,000 and everything will just work out, right? However, in many cases, that's not the way things work out when you're cooking, right? I can't just multiply the salt needed by 1,000 and just say we need to put 1,000 times more salt, right? I can't do that. And so in a very small kind of controlled system, that recipe might work. But then as soon as you expand it to millions of people, what you're introducing is variability. And once you introduce all this variability, right, you're going to get the Neanderthal who says, I don't want to bring back that seed to my family. You're going to get the person who says, I want to build a fence around this. And then when you do, how do you deal with that? The way you deal with that in a collectivist society is to come and say, sorry, you can't do that. We are going to nationalize that plot of land that you found that had peaches on it. We're going to nationalize that. We're going to take it forcibly from you. Now, that person is now going to be aggrieved, right? And once they are aggrieved, they're going to either be an opposer of the system or they have to be eliminated from the system. That is the necessary thing you have to do in that collectivist world. There's just no other way. You have to eliminate the guy who disagrees. There's no other way to do it.
Well, that can be
true. And the end of the day, you end up in the quest of saving thousands of lives, you end up killing thousands of people because they don't go according to what you believe is for the greater good. That is the challenge.
At the beginning, that might be true because let's use, for example, in America, there, like I said, less than 1% owns the vast majority of all the wealth, of all the land, of all the opportunity. So if we were to transition to socialism, those people are not going to give up power willingly. Like this is what happened in Cuba. And this is what happened in a lot of other countries in South America. Those people that were exploiting the wage workers, that were extracting all of this wealth that belonged to the people by virtue of this is their own labor, 100% of their own labor is generating this profit and this wealth. Those people will not give it away power because if you are at a position of power, you are never going to relinquish it willingly. So force would have to be given in that situation. And then what happened is,
right?
Yes, and those plantation owners that were doing this, a lot of them fled, and a lot of them went to Florida and that's why you see a large wealthy Cuban population in Florida, because a lot of those people a couple years earlier were plantation owners that were really wealthy and exploiting from the wage of the labor of workers. And then when the country flipped, those people that were doing all this exploiting had one option. I can stay here and try and fight all these people that I've been exploiting for years, or I can leave. And a lot of them left.
So I have a question for you. With respect to you made this point about the exploitation of the worker, and you were saying that all the profit or all the gain is created by the labor of the workers, right? And therefore, if those workers are creating 100% of the profit, how is it that they get, let's say, a paltry, 1% or whatever, right? And the capitalist gets the whole amount. Now, I'm not going to go into, capitalist theory in that way, but I want to ask this one question. When a person goes to work, right, what exactly are they doing? Are they, and let me phrase it properly. When they go to work, the hours that they're putting in, right? Oh, sorry, let me put it this way rather. The company that is offering the job, okay, is the company paying the person, or is the company paying for a skill? How do you see it?
Well, I mean, the two things are intertwined. You can't separate one from the other because skills are worthless without people able to
Not
perform them.
necessarily, because
Or automation.
McDonald's is replacing a lot of people with machines that have
Mhm.
the same skill. So skill is not necessarily intertwined with human beings. And so the company, and I think that's the mistake a lot of people make, is that they look at it as, hey, I am a dignified person. I have worth as a human being. And so the company has to pay me based on my intrinsic worth as a human being and my needs in order to survive. But the company is looking at the people not as necessarily as, I am paying for a human being who needs to feed his family. They're looking at it as I'm paying for a skill. And that skill has a value. Okay. That skill has a value. And if that skill, the value of that skill to me, let's say it's worth $10 an hour, that is what I'm going to pay for the value of that skill. I am not going to research the background of the human being doing the skill and say, well, he needs food, he has 4 kids, he has this, he has that, and therefore he needs to earn a livable wage. I am looking at it as I need a skill done. And if it's a human being that does the skill, I will pay the human being what it's worth. That skill is worth to me. Now, if I can get a machine to do that work, then I will pay the machine, right, what that skill is worth. So I will invest whatever I have to get the machine equal to the amount of that skill. So
they're going to have to, because
exactly.
that by saying
So
if they don't, I'm sorry.
So the person who is working in my company has no claim to anything beyond the skill that they're providing. And if the market is set such that that person has a skill that a lot of people have, then that person losing that particular individual, right, it's not a big draw to my business because I can just replace that person. There's another person who is willing to take that amount. Now, if you can get all the people in the society to say, we're not going to take that amount, right? We feel that skill is worth more. And you run out of people who are willing to take that amount, then the company will necessarily either have to raise that wage or, or go out of business because they won't have the people to do the work. Okay. And that is why I would say, and this is kind of a tangent,
exactly,
I think it's tied to it, but that is why things like when people talk about illegal immigration and so on, that is why that affects a society like America. Because, can you hear me? Hello? So it looks like we've lost Ahmed here, but this was really getting interesting, our conversation. So I am going to reschedule some time with him so we can jump more deeply into this conversation. But I hope that this has at least given you a sense of the fact that we can have conversations that are civil, that don't attack the personality of the individual, but focus on the ideological feasibility of what we're talking about.
Dude, my lid is acting crazy. My
Let's
phone,
do
my
this.
laptop was charging.
Okay, so let's do this. I have to actually get going to work. I have a meeting that I have to go to very quickly here. So, but I'm enjoying this conversation. I think we've made a lot of progress. What about are you okay with doing another episode? So normally my podcasts are about 40 minutes long, and we've crossed that mark already. So maybe I will wrap it up, and then I'll say, hey, we got deep into the conversation, and it would be good for me because it would allow people to say, hey, what's coming up next week? So maybe we can continue when you have your Wi-Fi and everything set up. I think we can continue this conversation, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah,
So
me.
let's do this.
And I'm
Okay.
trying to find an answer. So the what you stumped me is um, the thinking about the idea of human nature, because uh, I really don't have an answer to that, because I do believe that even like you say, like capitalism is like all these things are not true capitalism, but I think they are because you can't take away the human nature from socialism, but then not take it out from capitalism. But I need to think about that. I don't have an answer for that, so maybe if
That's
I start to
yeah.
reflect on it.
The way I would capture that is, I believe it was, I don't know who made this quote, but there was a person who said capitalism only works for immoral people, right? And what that means is that once you establish this free exchange between people, that supposes that all the chips are on the table, that I am not putting my thumb on the scale somewhere by hiding your options from you and making you think that you have a free voluntary exchange, because I'm hiding something from you, right? That's where the morality comes in.
Mm,
And so without that kind of morality where I say, hey, here are all the chips. I'm not hiding anything from you. I'm not a magician. Nothing is up my sleeve. This is how much it costs for me to make this widget. And I'm trying to make a 15% profit. In that world, that's a true free market. But what greedy people do and immoral people do is that they say, I don't want a 15% margin. I want a 70% margin. And because the market will not give me that 70% margin, I am going to pay some politicians to create rules that make it difficult for the people who will challenge that market value to get into business, right? And so they get in bed with these politicians, they create these rules, they make it harder for people to enter the market to compete with them. Then they are able to create that 70% margin and exploit people. But it's not because capitalism did that. It's because someone had to, because in a free society without those regulations, right, people will enter the market necessarily, they will compete, and eventually the jig will be up. But that is why people take capitalism, they marry it with cronyism, which comes from marrying capitalism with the government. And when you do that, then you create all these barriers that end up generating all the inequality that you're talking about. You don't get that market equilibrium because somebody's thumb is on the scale somewhere. So where I would agree with you would be, let's remove those thumbs on the scales. Let's make it very transparent what is going into. Let's stop the crony relationships with government. And what that means is that you have to make government small, right? You have to make government small such that they don't have that kind of power any longer. And if they don't have that power to make those shady deals with unscrupulous people, then you will have true equilibrium because the market will reset itself to where the value of things really are. That is why government is the only institution that can create inflation, that can create shortages, that can create all those things because people go and make deals where they put their thumbs on the scale. And that's why insulin costs so much. It's not because capitalism, it's because there's some government regulation that allows for that to happen. And if we can remove those government regulations and break up those crony deals, then I would make a generic, right? A generic insulin, and the cost will come down to $35, not because the government mandated it. It would do so because that's the actual value that is being provided to the public.
But why would they do that? Like if I like, for instance, Nvidia during COVID, they had enough. They make like a gaming chip. They had enough materials to keep producing this gaming chip. But excuse me, after COVID, like 2020 when COVID first hit, they didn't because nobody's working. I can't make this. But 2021, they had enough. But they other companies that had similar, not as good because they're the standard. They were making these gaming chips as well. But Nvidia still didn't release all the ones they had. They created an artificial shortage because COVID was so lucrative. Government had nothing to do with that. This is
Hold
one
on.
that was capitalistic.
Always. Let me counter that really, really quickly. My counter to that will be, right? if I see a flaw in free market capitalism, right? The flaw in free market capitalism is the fact that resolving problems like you're talking about takes time, because it's just it's kind of like, if I jump, let's say, think of two scales, right? If I throw a bunch of rocks on one end of the scale, right, it's going to take a little bit of time for that balance to happen. So in the interim, there will be inequality. So when NVIDIA decides to do this, right, there'll be some inequality. But in a world where, assuming we have a fair world where someone could compete and there are no regulations that would stop them, then what would happen is it will take a little bit of time, but someone will immediately say, I'm going to fill the need, right? I'm going to fill that need because NVIDIA has created this, they had the market share, but they've created this artificial shortage and in order to jack up their price. So I see that as an opportunity as an entrepreneur to come in and go do that thing for costs plus 15% and undercut them. So it won't take very long for NVIDIA to say, oh, shoot, we're going to lose our market share. We need to bring these prices back, or we need to release these things, the stockpile that we have immediately. But in the interim, while that is happening, there will be some inequality. So
but the interim is very
capitalism
long.
will say equality will come. It will come eventually. And when we leave things, it will happen naturally, right? But once you add government regulation, so let's assume government comes in and says, NVIDIA, you can't do this. Let's force you to release these items, right? And let's make some regulation that requires you to liquidate all these items. Now you've created this regulation, right? Now that regulation has created an artificial demand or supply into the market. That regulation did not give me a reason to create a competitive business, right?
But there was already demand was there. And the government did well, they didn't create policy, but the government investigated them. Without the government, they would have, to this day, they still would have done this. The government investigating them and realizing, hey, you actually have the inventory to create these chips that nobody else can do at the moment. Why are you not doing it? And then when it got out, then people were like, whoa, this is wrong. And then the public outrage is the cost. And without government, this doesn't happen. To this day, they still would have continued this practice.
And I would say with government, they are in the position they're in as the monopolies on this, or pseudo monopoly, right? Because I will tell you, their march to getting that market share came with a lot of government support, a lot of government protection, a lot of government lobbying to get to the point that they are.
I would agree with that. I don't know, but I would say,
and so once again, I say capitalism, of course, is not a moral or immoral system. It's almost like saying the internet is moral or immoral, right? It's a tool. It's a tool for creating value and distributing that value equitably across the market based on needs and wants and supply and demand and so on. So capitalism is not moral or immoral. Now, anybody can take a tool and adulterate it or use it for a purpose that is not intended. And so what I am trying to do is not necessarily saying that, hey, capitalistic societies don't have problems and don't have inequalities. What I'm saying is that we need to separate the idea of capitalism from things that people are doing that are rigging the system that have nothing to do with capitalism. Anyway, so let's not waste all our arguments here today. We will continue. We will continue this next week, and hopefully we'll be in better circumstances. Everything will be, you'll have better lighting and everything.
Not next week. I'm actually going. So I just graduated, and I'm going to. I'm actually going on vacation to Japan.
That is awesome. You should come back and tell us about it. So
is this, to be clear, this is the first one of your podcast?
No. The podcast has been going. It's pretty new. I started in November, so okay. I have 7. I'm only doing it once a week, so it's just one episode a week. And I took a couple of breaks off during the holidays, so I have 7 episodes already released, and this will be the very first kind of discussion interview type episode.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
all the others have been just me talking the whole time.
Okay.
So this is where I thrive more. I just hate talking to myself and looking at the camera and just that's
You're
why all my
very,
talks are scripted because I'm like, it's just weird to me to just look in the camera and just talk. And so
you're very, I would say like you're like, I don't know if they had it when you were in school, but when I was in high school, we had this thing called mock trial. And before you do that, you go through like this, when people make fun of it. They said public speaking 101. It's not what it's actually called, but that's pretty much what they say. They teach you how to speak and like not necessarily a debate, but like in a conversation format, because you don't want to say debate when you're in that kind of environment. But you like you can like write you can like hold a class on that. It's like I'm very impressed
thank
at the
you.
way
That
that you
makes me one of my biggest challenges. So I wanted my podcast to be a video podcast, but I'm so scared of speaking to myself and looking at the camera that it's so weird to me that I chickened out and
well,
I've only done the audio stuff. And
mm,
so, but when I'm talking to people, it comes
mhm,
naturally to me. And that's why I feel like that's going to be my future is talking to people and having discussions with people because that's when my brain starts to kind of flow and I'm able to make these connections and analogies. And a lot of these analogies I was making were on the fly. Like I did not,
mm.
have them pre-planned. They just come to me
Oh,
on the fly and I'm able to do that. So I think that's where my sweet spot is. So you may be, like I said, the beginning of my future.
all right. Hey, I'll take my royalties, man.
And you know what? This is one thing I've always been looking for, seriously, has been like I would say, someone on the left that I could trust and come to and say, hey, this is what the left is saying. How do you see it? Someone
Mhm.
who could kind of be a leftist whisperer for me, right?
Okay, well, to
To
be
help
clear
me.
though, I am not like I don't think American does not have a left. I'm not a liberal, so I just want to make sure that so when you put it on you, I'm not a liberal, and I don't believe liberals are left because they are still very much
So you would
self-interested
consider
and
yourself a
capitalist.
leftist then?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think
Okay.
liberals are left. I am, yeah.
Okay, so I've always wanted that kind of side of things.
Mm,
And a long time ago, I even wanted to create a platform that I was going to call basically imagine like in the chat, anytime you go to an article and you go into the chat, like
mhm,
imagine that you had a chat plugin where everybody had to declare what their biases were.
mm,
So you imagine Twitter where you had to say, hey, I am a leftist, so I'm responding to this post from that perspective and it's
mhm,
kind of known and everybody can see, okay, this person is on the left or this person is on the right or this person considers themselves neutral and
mhm.
so on and so forth. Because I think that we need both sides to balance each other. And it is in this kind of conversation that we can make progress.
I
So
would be scared though. Like it's you because I know I've seen you personally. I've seen your content and I've spoken to you. Like I said, we had that video. I would feel comfortable in that kind of environment, knowing because obviously you're on the right and I'm on the left. But if this was like another creator, I would be hesitant because I know there's so much vitriol. There's so much like animosity, but especially in politics in America, that I don't think if this was somebody else that I didn't really know, I would for sure not have done this. But because I know this would have came from a position of respect and conversation.
yeah, at the end of the day, I want to be able to walk away from every discussion as a friend and not as an enemy.
Mhm.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm sorry that we had so many issues. That this was really unprofessional.
That's
We
okay.
just
We'll
like
figure
this.
it out. This is the first. We can look back and say, look where we started.
That's right. That was good.
All right. We'll talk to you then.